My name is Alara. I'm 26, born and burned in Tucson, Arizona. The desert knows how to leave marks, and so did the fire that found me when I was 8. It was a freak accident. My cousin's birthday, a candle, a curtain, and me in the wrong place, in the wrong second. Since then, my skin has been a map of pain people can't help but stare at. My chest, shoulder, part of my neck, warped, textured, raw in color. I learned to live with fabric. Long sleeves in summer, high necks at the beach, dim lights in dressing room. I wore shame like it was stitched to my skin. But shame doesn't scream, it whispers. It creeps in when people look too long, then look away faster. It sits next to you in classrooms, in elevators, in waiting rooms. It was loudest when someone tried to be kind, or thought they were. I met him at a party I didn't even want to attend. His name was Caleb. His hands were clean, nails perfect. He didn't look at me like most did. Or maybe he just learned to hide it better. We talked about music, about the desert, about ugly places with beautiful light. That was how he described me the first night he kissed me. Unexpected. I should have run then. It wasn't fast. I let myself be convinced that someone could want me, not in spite of, but because of. That maybe his touch meant something other than curiosity. It had been years since someone touched me like that. Years since I allowed anyone close enough to see everything. So when he slid my shirt off, I held my breath, like I used to in locker rooms. When his eyes didn't flinch, I exhaled. When his fingers followed the lines of my scars without a word, I thought I'd made it. That maybe I was finally more than what the mirror insisted I was. We slept together that night. In his bed, in silence, with the hum of the ceiling fan spinning, a version of normal that I desperately wanted to believe. I remember the weight of his hand across my stomach after, like an anchor. I remember the smell of eucalyptus from the sheets. I remember thinking, maybe this is the moment that rewrites all the others. But then he spoke. His voice was soft, too soft, like he was tucking me in with a compliment that he thought would fix it all. He said he loved me. And then came the pause. That deadly pause. That moment where the sentence bends in a direction you didn't consent to. He said, "Despite that," and his hand brushed over my chest again, over the melted skin that refused to forget. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like he was awarding me a prize for being tolerable. My body went rigid. Every nerve that had opened for him just minutes ago shut like a slammed door. I stared at the ceiling and felt the fan turn into a blade. His bed, which had felt warm and wide, shrank. I suddenly couldn't tell if he saw me or the idea of me, the brave girl, the one with battle wounds. He wanted to believe he was the good guy, that loving someone despite made him exceptional. Laid there, naked, next to a man who had just stripped me of years of self-building with one word. I didn't move. Not yet. Not right away. It wasn't the kind of moment where you scream and throw things. It was slower, quieter, more dangerous. The kind of pain that doesn't shout. It seeps. In the silence, I traced my own scar with my fingers, not his. I felt the familiar pattern like Braille. A language only I could read. And I knew. I knew that what just happened wasn't sex. It wasn't love. It was pity wrapped in desire. And I had unwrapped it like a gift I thought I deserved. The hardest part was realizing I had let him in not because I trusted him, but because I was tired. Tired of holding myself together. Tired of always being the strong one. Tired of being brave in the mirror every morning and quiet in rooms filled with people who didn't know how to look at me. I was tired, and he mistook that for softness. So, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I pulled the sheet around my body, not because I was cold, but because I suddenly remembered the version of me I had worked so hard to become. The one who didn't ask for validation in bed. the one who didn't let a man's approval rewrite her worth. I got up. I dressed. He said my name, and I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some moments don't need closure. They just need an ending. I didn't go home right away. I walked. For miles, I think. My heels blistered, but I didn't care. The desert air had cooled just enough to sting my skin where it was exposed, where the scars thinned into something more tender. I kept my arms wrapped around myself, but not out of modesty. It was instinct. I had just been touched in all the ways I thought I wanted, and yet I felt filthier than I ever had walking down a hospital hallway in nothing but a paper gown. I replayed it over and over. The way his voice dipped, like he was trying to be gentle. The way he thought he was giving me a gift. His pity wasn't loud. It was soft, tender even. That's what made it so brutal. Pity masquerading as love is a slow kind of violence. It doesn't cut. It sinks, wraps, infects. When I finally got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, the one I usually avoided at night, and forced myself to look. My skin was uneven, chaotic, a map of moments I didn't ask for. My left shoulder curved inward slightly, the scar tissue pulling tighter as years passed. I saw the shimmer of ointment still embedded in the folds. I saw the shape of the girl I had to rebuild after the fire, and I couldn't tell if I had ever really finished her. I sat on the bathroom floor and stared at the tiles. The grout was dirty. I hadn't cleaned in weeks. Somewhere between work and survival, I'd forgotten how to take care of a space. My phone buzzed once. Then again, I didn't check it. I knew it was him. I knew it would say something like, "You're beautiful anyway," or, "I didn't mean it like that." But I didn't want anyway. I didn't want to be loved as an exception. I undressed again, slowly this time, not out of seduction, but as an autopsy. I needed to examine what he had touched, what he had poisoned. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and traced the outlines of my scars, the ones he had pretended didn't bother him. I remembered the way his fingers hesitated for a second, almost imperceptible, like muscle memory flinching before the brain could lie. That moment played on repeat. That tiny hesitation was the loudest truth in the whole night. I laid down on my bed, still naked, letting the cotton hit every damaged part. I stared at the ceiling and tried to find something solid to hold on to. Not a thought, not a memory, not even rage, just something real. But all I found was this weight, this knowledge that I had handed my body over like an apology. I had given it away, not in power, but in exhaustion, because part of me wanted to be touched so badly that I was willing to ignore the voice inside that whispered, "This isn't right." I'd spent so long convincing myself I was past it, that I'd healed, that I didn't need validation. But one touch, one stupid whisper in the dark, and I was right back there, in the burn unit, under fluorescent lights, listening to nurses talk like I wasn't awake. "It's not just the skin, poor thing. She's going to need therapy. A lot of it." I remembered how I stayed silent then, like I did now. I'd learned early that silence was safer than trying to correct people who had already decided what I was. I turned to my side and curled into myself, instinctive, like I could disappear into my own ribs. I thought about all the times I had dreamt of being seen, truly seen, and how, in that moment with him, I wasn't seen at all. I was studied. He observed me the way people observe tragedy, up close, with caution, with curiosity, but never long enough to feel accountable. It wasn't love. It wasn't closeness. It was charity dressed as desire. I thought about all the ways pity had entered my life. From strangers in the grocery store, from classmates who avoided eye contact, from a therapist who once told me I was resilient while glancing at my chest. But this was different. This time, I let it happen. I mistook it for something beautiful. That was the real violation. The bed still smelled like him. My skin did too, and that made me feel like I had been marked again, like another scar I didn't ask for. I got up and went to the shower. The water was too hot at first, but I didn't step back. I let it burn. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind myself that sensation meant I was still alive. I scrubbed, not because I thought I could wash him off, but because I needed to reclaim what he'd touched. Not just the skin, the space inside it. The water turned pink. I didn't know if it was from the scrubbing or from tears, or maybe it was just the light playing tricks. I watched it spiral down the drain and wondered how many versions of myself I had washed away like this. I stood there until the water ran cold and my skin began to tighten. When I got out, I didn't dry myself immediately. I looked in the mirror. Again, droplets clinging to me like glass. I looked like a girl who had survived something. Again. And I hated that word. Survived. It always made it sound like something had happened to me, never that I had done anything myself. I didn't want to survive. I wanted to own. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and opened my laptop. I stared at the blinking cursor and thought, maybe the world has only seen women like me in tragedy. Maybe that's the story they want. But what if I told it differently? What if this body, this scarred, raw, uninvited body, wasn't a cautionary tale but a challenge? The pity in his voice had lit a fuse in me. One I didn't know was still there, and something was starting to burn. The first time I felt my skin melt, I was 8. The flames came so fast I didn't even scream until it was over. Pain has a way of numbing you before it breaks you. I remember the sound more than anything, the crackling, the rush of air as someone opened the door, the way the curtains folded inward like hands clutching at me. The fire didn't just take skin. It took time, years of it. I missed school, missed birthdays, missed being normal. Hospitals replaced classrooms. Bandages replaced dresses. I had to relearn how to lift my arm, how to lie on my side without gasping. I thought those were the worst wounds I'd ever know. But burns don't linger the way words do. Fire scars the surface. Language digs deeper. I didn't understand that until much later, until people started calling me brave in the same tone they used to describe a lost dog that found its way home, until they praised me for showing my face anyway, for daring to wear a swimsuit, even with all that. Every time someone framed my existence as an act of courage, I felt the sting. Not because I wasn't strong, but because I knew what they really meant. They saw me as something to be forgiven, applauded for surviving what made others look away. The second set of scars started the moment I re-entered the world and saw how it stared back. The questions from strangers. What happened? Does it hurt? Can you feel that? The hesitation in store clerks' eyes. The polite smiles that never reached anyone's pupils. I became hyper-aware of space. How people stood a few inches farther. From me. How they shifted when I walked past. How no one ever touched me by accident. And yet, I adapted. I wore makeup that couldn't cover anything but made me feel like I was trying. I learned how to dress strategically. Asymmetrical cuts that suggested style rather than concealment. Colors that distracted rather than announced. I got good at being a version of myself that didn't scare anyone too much. But there was always the echo of how I used to look, how I used to be, and the long, aching gap between those two versions. Then there were the words that didn't come from strangers, but from people who claimed to love me. My mother, telling me to wear sleeves, just in case. My aunt, suggesting laser treatments, to help you move on. A boyfriend who once said I was lucky I had a pretty face, as if that canceled out the rest. Compliments came with qualifiers. Love came with conditions. Everything was conditional. But nothing gutted me like the soft, careful pity that Caleb wrapped around his affection. That one word, despite, carved into me deeper than any scalpel. Because it sounded kind. Because it sounded like a favor. Because it told me everything I feared was true. That even the best version of me was something to be tolerated. I started hearing his voice everywhere after that. In every advertisement, in every compliment, in every message from well-meaning followers who called me inspiring. That word made me want to scream. I didn't want to be a symbol. I didn't want to be proof of survival. I wanted to be undeniable. Desired not because I overcame, but because I existed fully, boldly, without asterisks. I began deleting photos, off my phone. Old selfies where I'd angled my body to hide the worst of it. Pictures where I'd blurred or cropped the texture of my skin. I looked at those photos and saw someone still begging to be accepted on terms that weren't hers. I had spent years trying to look good enough for the people who didn't deserve to touch me, let alone judge me. One night I sat down and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. It was full of photos taken during recovery, raw, brutal, images, tubes, gauze, blood, my skin swollen and stitched. I stared at them for hours, not with disgust, with awe. I had forgotten just how much I had endured, how much I had rebuilt. I saw beauty in those images, not aesthetic beauty, but the kind that demands silence, the kind that says, I am still here. That night, I made a choice. Not some grand decision. Just a small shift. I took a new photo. I didn't pose. I didn't adjust the lighting. I didn't soften the lines. I stood in front of my mirror, let the flash reflect off the ridges and folds of my skin, and pressed the shutter. The image stared back at me, unapologetic. It was ugly, and it was perfect. The words that had once felt like poison started to lose their power. Not all at once, not easily, but slowly, like venom fading after the bite. I began to recognize them for what they were, reflections of others' discomfort, not truths about me. Pity, when peeled back, is fear in disguise. People are afraid of what they don't understand, of what they can't fix, of what they might become. I wasn't here to be fixed. The words had carved new scars, but unlike the ones left by fire, these didn't have to stay. I started rewriting them. Every time someone called me brave, I asked why. Every time someone said I was strong, I asked for proof. I stopped smiling to make others comfortable. I stopped apologizing for being seen. And somewhere between all the silences and stares, I felt something shift. A fuse had been lit. Not the kind that explodes outward, but the kind that burns slow, deep, hot. The kind that makes space for something new, something dangerous, something true. When I was 11, I wore a tank top to school for the first time since the fire. It was Arizona summer, the kind that baked the pavement until shoes stuck to it and made the air shimmer like lies. I had begged my mother to let me wear it. Not because I liked how I looked in it, but because I was tired of being hot. The shirt was sky blue and fit loosely. My scars, twisted and shiny along my left shoulder and part of my chest, peeked out like a secret someone had almost kept. That morning, she looked at me longer than usual, her mouth in a thin line. She didn't yell. She didn't forbid it. She just exhaled and said I should think about how people might react. I didn't understand what she meant until recess. A boy in my class looked at my arm, tilted his head, and asked if it hurt to be like that. He didn't say it with cruelty. He said it like you'd ask about someone's limp or a dead dog on the side of the road. That kind of curiosity that isn't kind. It just is. After that, 2 girls refused to sit next to me during lunch. Someone told a teacher I was making people uncomfortable. That evening, when I got home, I found the tank top folded on my bed. My mother handed me a stack of cardigans and said they were on sale. Years passed, but that tone stuck with me. The way her voice would soften when she talked about my clothes. The way she'd gently remind me not to draw attention. She never said I was ugly. She never said I was broken. She didn't have to. Her suggestions were velvet-lined cages. I learned to anticipate them. The raised eyebrows when I reached for a scoop-neck shirt. The worried glance when I wore short sleeves to a family event. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect me. From stares, from whispers, from a world that hadn't learned how to look at difference without shrinking. But every time she said it, every time she suggested a longer hem, a higher neckline, a softer fabric, I heard a different message. You are too much for the world as you are. You must be edited to be acceptable. You must be shaped into something easier to digest. By the time I was 16, I had memorized the art of hiding. I knew what kinds of fabrics stuck to scar tissue and which slid over it like water. I had shirts for doctor visits and shirts for birthday parties. I had a wardrobe built on apology. My closet was a museum of concealment. Every time I bought something that showed skin, I buried it under something else, just in case. In high school, I watched girls wear spaghetti straps and backless dresses. I watched them move without caution, bend without adjusting, dance without wondering how many eyes were tracking their flesh. I envied their carelessness, not because they were beautiful, though many were, but because they were allowed to be. No one expected them to shrink. There was a dance my junior year. I bought a dress in secret, deep burgundy, soft satin, thin straps. It revealed more of me than I had ever allowed. I stood in front of the mirror and imagined walking in like nothing was different. I imagined owning the space, not apologizing for it. But that night, as I stood by the door, dress on, keys in hand, my mother walked into the room. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked. And then, with the same calm voice she had used so many times before, she said the line that would replay in my head for years. You don't want people to be scared, do you? That night, I wore a black shawl over the dress. It clung to my skin in the worst way. I spent the evening pulling it up, adjusting it, sweating under it. No one commented on the dress. No one asked me to dance. I went home early and cried in the bathroom, not because I was rejected, but because I had once again chosen safety over self. My mother never meant to shame me. She thought she was helping me survive in a world she knew was cruel. But the road she offered was narrow, full of locked doors and whispered warnings. It taught me to fear the impact of my own body before I ever got to know it. It taught me to see myself through the eyes of people who couldn't handle anything outside the script. Even in adulthood, her voice lingered. I would hold a crop top in a store and hear her question echo in my head. I would go to events and feel myself scanning the room, wondering who was watching, who was whispering. It took years before I realized the fear she had passed down wasn't about modesty or manners. It was about invisibility, about folding yourself so small that no one could hurt you. But invisibility is a different kind of violence. It kills you slowly, one unspoken dream at a time. You begin to forget what it felt like to want, to burn, to take up space. You become grateful for scraps of love, of attention, of visibility, because at least they don't sting. The real betrayal wasn't that the world stared. It was that I believed it had the right to. That's what my mother taught me without meaning to, that their comfort mattered more than my expression. That safety was worth the cost of self-erasure. But something inside me had begun to shift. Maybe it was that photo I took. Maybe it was Caleb's voice in my head, playing like a broken record. Maybe it was just exhaustion of carrying generations of shame stitched into my sleeves. I no longer wanted to be safe. I wanted to be seen. The beach used to be a place I loved, before the fire. I have vague memories of sandcastles and sunburns, of my dad tossing me in the water while I squealed, salt clinging to my skin like glitter. Back then, I never thought twice about my body. It was just something that carried me through the waves, let me float, let me dance in the shallows. But after the fire, the beach became a battlefield. Not because of the sand or the sun or the water, but because of people. Their stares were harsher than UV rays, and their discomfort burned in ways the fire never did. I was 19 the first time I wore a swimsuit again. Not one of those high-neck, full-coverage ones designed to hide everything. This was a bikini, a plain black two-piece that left my shoulder, my ribs, and the twisted skin across my left side exposed. I had chosen it on purpose. Not because I felt brave, but because I was tired. Tired of sweating under layers. Tired of treating my body like a problem to be solved. I had decided, in a quiet moment of defiance, that I would go to the beach and just be. Not inspire, not educate. Just exist. It was a family beach, full of shrieking kids and tired parents, and coolers packed with too much ice. I laid out my towel near the edge of the crowd, not quite hidden, but not in the center either. I could feel the glances before I even sat down. They slid over me like shadows, quick and polite, and then came back again. No one said anything at first. They never do. They just watch. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend it didn't matter. That the whispering behind me wasn't about me. That the slight shift in space when I walked to the water was just coincidence. But then I heard it. Small, high-pitched, innocent. A child's voice asking loudly, with pure curiosity, why that girl had broken skin. I opened my eyes and saw him, maybe 5 or 6 years old, pointing directly at me. His mother's face turned red instantly. She pulled his arm down and mumbled something too low for me to hear. She didn't look at me. She just gathered their things and moved to a different spot, farther away. As if I were contagious, as if my scars could jump off my body and infect theirs. That was the first. Then came the second and the third. Children are honest. They haven't learned yet what adults consider polite. They speak what they see, and what they saw was something strange. Something that didn't fit into their neat understanding of what bodies are supposed to look like. I don't blame them. It wasn't their voices that hurt me. It was the reactions of the people who should have known better. No one ever came up to me. No one ever said, "Hey, don't worry about it." They just moved, shifted their towels, redirected their kids. A few gave me that tight-lipped smile that said, "We see you and we're uncomfortable, but we're trying not to be." That smile is worse than a stare. It's full of guilt, of performance. It says everything they're trying not to say out loud. I stayed for an hour. I forced myself to. I laid there while sweat pooled in the creases of my skin, while grains of sand stuck to the ridges of my scars, while the sun beat down on me like it was trying to test my resolve. I got in the water once. Just far enough to feel weightless. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to not be looked at. When I came back to shore, I noticed a family had settled nearby. A little girl, maybe 7, with braids and pink sunglasses, stared at me openly. Her mother leaned in and whispered something in her ear. The girl didn't move. She just kept looking. I waited for the usual reaction, to be shunned, avoided, erased. But instead, she walked over. Just a few steps. Just enough to stand close. She didn't say anything, just looked. I nodded at her and gave a small smile. She looked at my skin, then at her own arm, then back at me. Then she walked away. Her mother watched us with a wary expression, but didn't call her back. That moment stayed with me longer than any of the others, because it reminded me that children aren't born afraid of difference. They learn it. They inherit the discomfort. They mimic the retreat. And if the people raising them can't find the courage to look, then that shame gets passed down like a name. On the way home, I sat in my car and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The sun had left pink patches along my collarbone. My skin looked flushed and raw, like it had remembered how to feel again. I wanted to cry but didn't. The tears weren't there. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was something more corrosive. Erasure. The quiet way people decide you don't belong in their landscape. Not with hatred, just absence. I thought about every place I'd been taught to retreat from. Fitting rooms, swimming pools, gyms, public showers, intimacy. All spaces where bodies are exposed and judged, where the smooth and symmetrical are worshipped, and everything else is covered in metaphor and silence. My body had become a story I wasn't allowed to tell in public. But I was beginning to realize something. Every time I let myself be erased, I confirmed their belief that I should be. Every time I walked away, covered up, stayed quiet, I made space for their comfort and shrank my own existence. The problem wasn't that children stared. It was that I had spent years believing they were right to. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind sting my skin. I needed to feel the world again, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt. Because pain meant I was still fighting. Pain meant I hadn't disappeared, and I refused to be invisible any longer. It started with shadows. I took my first photo of myself late at night, the room dark except for the soft yellow spill from a hallway lamp. I was half out of frame, my arm wrapped around my stomach, the contours of my scars visible only in pieces. It wasn't meant to be anything, just an experiment, a private moment, a way to look at myself without the burden of a mirror, without the fear of someone watching. I didn't smile. I didn't pose. I just stood there and clicked the shutter. When I looked at the photo, something in me flinched. Not from disgust, from honesty. There was no filter to protect me, no forgiving light. Just my body as it was, raw, bent, carved by fire and time. I stared at the image for a long time. I didn't delete it. I didn't crop it. I saved it. That felt like rebellion. I began taking more, not every day, just when I could stand to. Always in low light at first. My phone filled with photos no one else would see. My shoulder bare against the bed sheets. My legs curled on the floor. My profile caught in a bathroom mirror. I wasn't trying to be beautiful. I wasn't trying to be anything. I just wanted to prove I was real. That I existed outside of how people looked at me. Each photo chipped away at the silence. At the conditioning that had taught me to hide, to flinch, to adjust. My skin became less foreign. The scars became less loud. I stopped, looking away from myself. Eventually, I turned the lights on. It was terrifying at first. The shadows had offered safety. They blurred the hard edges, softened the burn lines. But under light, everything sharpened. Every ridge and ripple came into focus. The discoloration across my chest, the uneven patches on my ribs, the way the skin tightened and pulled where it had healed unevenly. But I didn't stop. I needed to see it all. I needed to look without recoiling. I set up my phone on a timer and took photos in the bathroom, in my bedroom, against blank walls. I stood, in front of windows, let the sun hit me, let the light expose everything. I stood there like an artifact daring to be catalogued. And every time I pressed that button, I took something back. A piece of myself that shame had stolen. A piece that other people's pity had buried. Then one day, I stepped in front of the lens in nothing but my underwear. I had no plan. I just wanted to see. I wanted to know if I could. The fabric clung to me in ways that felt both frightening and grounding. My body wasn't hidden, not from myself, not from the camera. I looked into the lens and didn't smile. I didn't need to. That photo made me cry. Not because of what I saw, because of what I didn't feel. For the first time, there was no self-hatred, no internal recoil, no silent scream for smallerness. I saw a woman who had been stitched, back together more times than most people could understand. A woman who still had softness left in her even after being burned, even after being reduced to someone's despite. I started printing the photos, small, glossy Fort 6s. I taped them to my wall in a private corner of my bedroom. At first it felt wrong, like I was exposing something sacred. But slowly, it began to feel necessary, like building a map back to myself. Every image was a conversation I was finally having, with my skin, with my history, with the version of me that had spent so many years disappearing. It became a ritual. I'd shower, stand in front of the mirror while my skin was still wet, and take 3 photos. No makeup, no adjusting, just breath, presence, flash. Some days I looked at them right away. Some days I let them sit on my phone like secrets waiting for the courage to be claimed. The more I saw myself, the more I stopped chasing perfection. I stopped shaving for symmetry, stopped covering the parts that refused to look smooth. I wore the scars like signatures, like a language only I could read. And slowly, very slowly, I started posting. Not everything, just hints. A close-up of my shoulder, the curve of my waist where scar tissue met soft skin. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I just posted them like anyone else would, like a person with a body, unfiltered, unafraid. People noticed. Some praised me, some pitied me, some unfollowed. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it because for years, the world had made me feel like my body was a problem, a burden, something to be blurred. And now I had proof, visible, tangible proof, that I was whole. Not in spite of, not because of, just whole. I started to dream of something bigger. A project, maybe. A way to show women like me that we didn't need to be brave to be visible. That we didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. That our bodies, no matter how marked, held stories worth framing. I bought a tripod. I cleared a wall. I ordered fabric in deep reds and soft creams. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was creating, and for the first time in my life, the lens didn't feel like a threat. It felt like freedom. I didn't plan for anyone to see the photo. It was one of hundreds I had taken in the quiet of my apartment. Just me, the camera, and a part of myself I was still learning to accept. In that particular shot, I was standing near the window, the light hitting just enough to make the ridges of my scar shimmer faintly like a topographical map. I wasn't smiling. My eyes weren't pleading. It was just me, shoulders back, arms loose at my sides, in black underwear, no makeup, no apologies. There was something in my face that I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not defiance. Stillness. Like I had finally stopped running from my own reflection. I posted it on my private account with a caption that didn't explain anything. I didn't need it to. I wasn't trying to go viral. I just wanted to share it with the handful of people who followed me, other burn survivors, artists, women who had written to me over the years, thanking me for the way I showed up in pieces. It felt like a small act of rebellion, but also, finally, peace. A week later, I got a message in my inbox. It was from someone at a brand I didn't recognize at first. I thought it was spam. It was short, professional, but personal in a way that made my heart stutter. They said they had come across the photo. Someone had shared it or reposted it, or maybe it had found its way through one of those algorithmic miracles. They were launching a campaign on unretouched truth, on bodies that weren't molded by marketing teams, and they were looking for faces that challenged the default. They wanted me to be part of it. At first, I froze. The email sat there for a full day before I opened it again. Then I reread it 5 times. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. All I could hear was my mother's voice from years ago, soft and cautious. You don't want people to be scared. All I could see were those parents at the beach, those kids with their questions. Caleb whispering his gentle, deadly despite. What if this wasn't a celebration? What if it was just another way to put me on display? But then I remembered the photo. How it felt to take it. How it felt to see myself in it. Not through someone else's gaze, but through my own. Not softened, not hidden. And I realized I had already exposed myself. The only difference now was scale. I wrote back. They wanted to use the photo, not reshoot, not retouch. Just use it exactly as it was. That alone made my throat tighten. They said it captured something they hadn't seen in any of their castings. A kind of quiet power. They wanted that. The campaign rolled out 6 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even know exactly when it would launch. I got a text from a friend first, just a screenshot. My photo, large and centered, with a line in simple black text beneath it. We don't blur truth. It was part of a carousel. The others were of people with visible disabilities, birthmarks, amputations, wrinkles, stretch marks. None of the images were framed as tragic. They were just there, raw, sharp, present. The way real life is when it isn't airbrushed to death. Suddenly, I was everywhere. The campaign went viral. My inbox filled with messages, some kind, some exploitative, some strange. News sites picked it up. Some used words I hated. Brave, inspirational, overcoming. But others got it right. They talked about reclamation, about ownership, about beauty that doesn't ask permission. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Old classmates, distant relatives, even Caleb. His message was short, unsure, something about being proud of me. I didn't answer. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, like an old scar that no longer hurt, but still remembered. The brand invited me to a launch event in New York. I almost didn't go. The idea of walking into a room full of people who might only see me as that girl with the skin made me want to fold into myself. But something louder pushed through. Not ego. Not even pride. Just the simple, powerful need to stand in my own narrative. I flew out alone. I wore a black silk dress that didn't cover my shoulder. I didn't pin up my hair. I didn't hide. When I walked into that gallery space, the first thing I saw was the giant print of my photo hanging from the ceiling, 10 feet tall. People were gathered around it, talking, pointing, not in disgust, but in awe. Some stood silent, just looking. No one moved away. No one turned their head. A woman with a prosthetic leg stood beside me. She didn't say anything. Just looked at me, then at the image, then back again, and nodded. That was enough. I spent the evening moving slowly through the crowd, letting myself take up space. I was no longer background, no longer a before image. I wasn't a symbol, or a victim, or a cause. I was simply there, a woman in a room, being seen. Later, alone in my hotel room, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself again. The same body, the same scars. but something had shifted. I wasn't documenting anymore. I wasn't trying to reclaim anything. I had already done that. Now I was building. There is a moment, just before the camera clicks, when I am utterly still. Not posing, not adjusting, not performing, just existing. I've come to crave that silence, the breath between anticipation and confirmation. It's in that space that I remember what it took to get here. I remember the heat of the fire, the hospital lights, the plastic smell of new bandages. I remember every time someone flinched when they saw me, every hand that hesitated, every whisper that wasn't meant to be heard. And I remember my own silence, thicker than any scar, pressing down on me for years like a second skin. Now, when I walk into a room, people still look. But I no longer flinch under their eyes. I've learned to meet their gaze with something stronger than defiance. I meet it with presence. This is my body. This is my skin. This is the history I carry. Not as a burden, but as a banner. There is no covering up anymore. No need to soften what has always been sharp. I've stopped making myself smaller to ease the discomfort of others. I've stopped allowing the word brave to be a substitute for beautiful. The world has tried to define me by contrast. They've said I'm beautiful despite my scars, strong despite the trauma, successful despite the shame. But they're wrong. The truth is simpler, harder, and far more powerful. I am who I am not, in spite of what I've lived through, but because of it. Every step I take, every breath I draw, every photo I release into the world is built from everything I was, told to hide. And I'm done hiding. I still remember the first time I heard the phrase, "despite that," whispered into my ear like a kindness, as if my existence was an obstacle someone had decided to overlook, as if loving me was an act of charity. That moment marked me, more than fire ever could. It burned deeper. It shaped something in me, something I didn't even know had been, waiting to rise. And now, when I hear it, when someone tries to wrap their discomfort in politeness, when they fumble for words to separate me from my own body, I don't shrink. I don't smile and let it pass. I speak, because it's not despite. It's because of these scars, I know what it means to rebuild from ashes. Because of this skin, I understand endurance in a way no book could ever teach. Because of what was taken from me, I have learned how to take up space. Real, undeniable, unapologetic space. I've stood in front of cameras in lingerie, in silk, in nothing but light. I've looked into lenses and refused to be softened. The more I show of myself, the more I find. I've had women write to me from hospital beds, from burn units, from recovery rooms, telling me they saw my photo and, for the first time, didn't feel like monsters. That they saw a future. That they saw themselves not as broken, but as becoming. I never set out to be a symbol. Symbols don't bleed. I bleed. I break. I wake up some mornings and still want to hide, but I don't. I've learned that courage doesn't mean being fearless. It means being seen anyway. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. My body isn't perfect. It doesn't need to be. It is textured, asymmetrical, uneven. It catches the light differently. It reminds people that survival has a shape, a temperature, a color. And it is mine. I no longer look at mirrors searching for approval. I look to remember, to honor, to witness. This body has carried me through fire and back. It has held pain, held silence, held strangers who didn't know how to love it. And still, it stands. Sometimes I see myself on billboards now. My face, my scars, my body, out there in the open. There's no filter, no explanation, just me. I used to imagine that would feel like victory, But it feels quieter than that. It feels like return. Like finally arriving in a place I was never supposed to reach, and realizing I built the road myself. The girl who once cried in a dressing room, tugging down sleeves to hide the war written on her shoulder, now wears that story across her skin like armor. Not because she won, but because she lived. Because she kept living. Because she decided that survival wasn't enough, and chose visibility instead. So the next time someone says, "Despite that," I will stop them. I will look them in the eye and say the truth, clear and without hesitation. Not despite, because.